Well, sustainable investment, sustainable finance, it's an approach which considers the longer term and considers all the externalities, all the byproducts of what a business is doing. And the most notable example, the most populous example, is climate change. So, an oil company gets oil out of the ground. It may do little environmental damage doing that. The environmental damage comes when the oil is burnt. So sustainable investment considers the emissions from the use of products. And it's that breadth of vision and the long term is what distinguishes it from the still primarily short term, narrow focus of much of conventional finance. I think the sustainable investors consider more risks and on the longer term basis. They are also looking increasingly for opportunities, so we mustn't always be framing this in terms of negatives. But yes, they're looking at risks from sort of second and third order risks. So if we consider Boohoo recently been in the news, that company has been treating the workers in its supply chain very badly, and that's had a reputational impact. So you're several degrees removed from the Boohoo shop there. To mitigate that risk, you need to look at the suppliers and how they're treating their staff. But the reputational damage accrues to the top of the value chain, the Boohoo brand. And this is the kind of thinking which sustainable financiers do a lot. What are the risks? What are the emerging risks? What are the long-term risks? And they're not always obvious, so our members are poking around looking for the problems, and the converse of that, looking for the opportunities. So if you can find a supply chain which treats the workers well, there are benefits in that. The workers probably stay longer, so there are lower recruitment and training costs. They become more proficient at their work, their efficiency rises. So it's not all risks, but yes, the risks are different. They're longer term, they're broader, and the converse is the opportunities. Yes. Our opinion polling suggests that many of the end customers, that's you and I, would like their money to be not doing harm or all actively doing good. So you have that groundswell behind you. But it is a financial argument. If you are managing the risks and finding the opportunities, over time we think your return should be better. And indeed, performances during the COVID crisis do suggest that's true. It does look like over this sort of 6-month period, the sustainable funds have been in companies which have treated their staff better, which have more robust supply chains, just generally more integrity, and their share prices and the fund performances appear to have held up better. Now, there's no guarantee that will continue, but it does kind of validate this hypothesis that if you're looking more broadly, looking longer term, treating people with a degree of integrity, that the performance will be better. So, it all comes together. And climate change, which you mentioned, is an example of that. You've got to be cognizant that we cannot continue burning as much carbon as we are. So, you don't want to be investing in business models dependent on unalloyed burning of carbon. That's fundamental risk people need to be managing. I think it's a very positive future. I mean, the government is actively asking people like us, what do you think we should be doing? And we are responding. We're flagging that, yes, if you're going to give a support package to an industry, the quid pro quo must be that industry starts and then begins to implement a really good decarbonisation plan or a resource mitigation plan if they're, mining and so forth. There's got to be a quid pro quo aligned with green, aligned with the legally binding net zero objectives Britain has. But there's also a very important social part, and that's probably the bit which has changed during COVID is, yes, there's a lot of focus on climate and the environment, but now we recognise the social bit is very important too. So increasingly people are talking of a just transition. So we transition away from a carbon-heavy economy to a net zero economy. But we can't do that by just throwing lots of oil workers up in Aberdeen out of work. What we've got to do is provide work for them. So, the government support for the new industries perhaps has to be targeted on Aberdeen. It's got to be joined up thinking. The government seems receptive to that message. Let's hope it does land and they act on it. It's everybody now. So the public want it. Our opinion polling shows that. But increasingly, the argument that there are financial risks in being unsustainable, which is what people like me and many other colleagues in the sector have spent years making that case to the insurance companies and to the pension funds, we've won that argument. They now recognise it. The regulators recognise it. So we've got large investors asking their fund managers for increased sustainability, and we've got the regulators changing the rules to force it, to force consideration of these issues. So it's coming across the financial services value chain. There's talk of independent financial advisors, the people you and I might go to if we're fortunate enough to have some money, who would advise us on where to invest it. There's talk of those financial advisors being made to ask us about our values as part of the fact find, as part of the onboarding of taking a new client. The advisor will ask the client about these issues. And the feedback from our advisor members in UKSIF is that's a really good process. The client sort of talks about things important to them, and they realise that it's possible to, have that belief and for the money to follow that belief. And this is great news. The client's happier, and the advisor is able to add value. So I think, it's really exciting things happening down there at the kind of individual investor level and at the big pension fund level. People like Nest, the National DC pension scheme, which millions of your viewers will be investing in. They have a very strong sustainability policy. Other large employers, BT, University Superannuation Scheme, they are leaders in this kind of thinking. The railways, pensions. Yes, lots of people are doing this, and lots of the big insurers like Aviva, they are, really beginning to implement this kind of thinking. The only bit I know about is the cement industry, which is currently painted as one of the bad guys because of its CO2 emissions. So it involves mining, it involves transport, and it involves use of a lot of heat. So, it is a problem industry. There's no two ways about that. I'm aware of initiatives in the industry to try and reduce the impact. But I think the pressure is going to be there on cement going forward. When I look at building sites, I see a lot of waste as well. I think there's going to be pressure at that practical level. What happens to all these wooden pallets? Are wooden pallets best? Discuss. I'm aware of companies doing reusable plastic pallets. It's up for the industry to decide what the best is. It's not up for me to tell them. What I am going to tell the industry today is you have to react. If you don't react, you will lose your license to operate, and eventually the government and the regulators will come after you. It's what's happened to the oil companies and the coal companies. If they don't react, if they don't adjust, they'll be forced to. And this, I think, is the threat over the whole construction industry. It needs to move to using more sustainable inputs, materials, and it's just got to get better. Easy for me to say, I understand that, but this is the warning. If you don't do it, someone will come after you. There are two bits to insurance. There are the risks they insure, and there's what they do with their investment portfolios. And they have the investment portfolios to pay the claims if a claim falls due. Now, their thinking in terms of the investment portfolios is pretty advanced. They recognise the risk. They recognise if they put their money in a coal company in particular, it's probably going to be shut down within a decade or two, no matter where it is around the world. We've stopped mining coal in the UK recently. It's going to stop. And my guess is it's going to shrink to a fraction of what it is within 2 decades. So the insurers recognise the investment risks in their portfolios, in things like coal, in things like oil, and they're seeking to mitigate those. The interesting bit is what they do in their main business streams. Do they offer lower premiums to industries and to companies which are behaving more sustainably because there's less chance of those companies being sued? Things like that, thinking like that. And we're beginning, I think, to see that kind of thinking in how they underwrite, in the insurance products they offer. But it's very early days, and there's more the insurers could do there. But I think that will be the trend we see going forward, is the sustainability thinking coming through to how they actually do the business of insurance as opposed to the business of investment. And that is where I think the construction industry, there are opportunities for it. If it shifts to a more sustainable model, I think over time the insurers will recognise that, and hopefully financial benefits will flow. The science on climate is overwhelming. I used to meet a lot of climate deniers 8-10 years ago. Now I meet relatively few, and I think we have won the argument based on science. If we don't address CO2, we're going to change the climate with serious social and health problems, and serious economic problems as well, but the health and the social, I think, will outweigh even the economic. So we just have to do climate. But it's not just climate, it's resource depletion is there as well. You know, we're using far more of the world's resources than we should be, and that will have to be addressed. We're going to have less impact. So in construction, we have to use more recycled materials, we have to use more sustainable materials. Timber is kind of an issue in this campaign. Yes, we have to use more timber. We have to find ways of proving it's safe to address concerns on the part of the insurers. But, you know, construction is a big industry in the UK. It should be possible. Okay, work with the universities, work with the engineers, and make the case, and you will be listened to. So resource depletion, climate, if we don't address all these issues, our grandchildren are going to have, well, they're going to hate us, for instance. It's going to make Christmas 2050 pretty painful, isn't it, you know? You know, you get your 13-year-old granddaughter beating you up over the fact the weather's unpredictable and we've run out of food or something, you know. So we've just got to get it right. And it's down to the people watching videos like this, executives in decision-making roles, you know, you have to act.